rebel force has penetrated the shield and landed on Endor.
This is where the fun begins.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars news and commentary.
With Jason Swank and Jimmy Mack.
I've seen Star Wars 500 times.
Star Wars #1!
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Now it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
All right, chut everyone. Welcome back to Rebel Force Radio, your source for the Force and oh so much more. Great to be back with you this week, and glad you're spending some time with us here for the show the week of May 21st, 2021, 5/21/21. And we've got a great one for you. This is one of those little surprise gifts that sort of happens when you're just sort of minding your own business and you open up an email and all of a sudden here's FJ DeSanto saying, you know, I was listening to your show back a few weeks ago and you were doing those Reddit rumors and I know what happened. Let me come on and let me tell you what really went down. So Mac called him on it right away, said, okay, next week. How's Tuesday? So we've got FJ DeSanto coming up in the cantina. And as I mentioned, Mac, that can only be one guy. When you say Mac, you think of one guy, and that's my good friend and yours from Chicago, Jimmy Mac.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Star Wars fans. The Mac is back. And yeah, there are few people who could just reach out to us out of the blue and say, listen, I'm coming on. And that's FJ DeSanto, Transformers producer.
Yeah,
FJ DeSanto. We should say because he's just trucking along with that Cybertron storyline that he oversees for the Transformer franchise.
Here's the thing that I love about FJ's perspective. In addition to him being, you know, a seasoned veteran of the entertainment industry and all of that, is his role as sort of the steward of the Transformers, you know, franchise right now in animation.
Sure.
Yeah, in animation, which is significant because that's where it began.
Yes, yes.
He has a unique perspective as someone who has had to pick up the baton of an existing franchise with not just one canon, multiple canons and timelines and all of that. So he does know what this kind of responsibility feels like, and also dealing with fans of all persuasions and opinions and all of that. So I really appreciate that perspective that he's able to bring, and he will be bringing it in the cantina coming up. So we'll see. Well, yes. You know, Mac and I were talking, it took us 2 episodes of RFR to get through all of those Reddit rumors and details. I guess they weren't really rumors. It was basically an alleged account by someone associated with the production of all 3 of the Star Wars sequel films, anonymous, of course, and kind of gives you the rundown of, you know, how it happened according to him or her. So FJ is going to set the record straight as far as he knows it.
Yes, we also want to stay tuned for his curse-filled analysis coming up later.
No extra charge for that, kids.
And you know, I'm not going to tell this to FJ. But, you know, as long as he doesn't say anything too nasty, I'm going to let him slide with a few S-bombs. But maybe I'll get the beeper out for the F-bombs. We'll see. But I'm giving you fair warning right now. So we'll put FJ toward the end of the show.
You know, what I
hopefully
think
you'll make up your mind by then.
I always think of FJ when I'm watching the holiday classic A Christmas Story, and they talk about the old man and how he painted in profanity the way some artists paint in oils. And I think about FJ's kind of the same way, you know? I mean, he's almost an artist.
That is accurate, yeah. Yeah, he's a performance artist when it comes to profanity.
Yeah.
And he knows how to use it well. And you guys have been listening to the show for a long time. You know FJ DeSanto. He shoots from the hip. He keeps it real. And I don't want to put any restrictions on that reality that oozes out of him. He's the real deal. He's a legitimate guy who doesn't sugarcoat anything. And that's why we love him.
That's right. That's right. Also coming up in the program, Mac has filled us up with some great audio highlights from some recent interviews by the likes of Patton Oswalt talking about The Mandalorian. And Seth Rogen dropped by Conan O'Brien's podcast and shared some George Lucas stories. Always fun to hear about the notorious GL, the private side of the notorious GL. And maybe we'll have some show and tell if we have time and some listener feedback. We'll see. But let's kick things off with checking out the headlines.
Let's do it.
I have good news for you, my lord.
That's good news. Come closer, I have good news.
All right, I have to say one of my favorite programs. I don't watch a lot of news anymore. I'm so burnt out between the election and COVID and all that. I really stay away from the news, but I do love CBS Sunday Morning. I'm kind of an arts and croissant guy occasionally, and they cover all types of culture, arts and culture, and things like that. And Ewan McGregor was featured this past week on the show. I think it's fun to watch Ewan sort of have matured into this. Certainly not senior, but an actor sort of in their prime. He's got some gray and some he's what's the word? He's ripe. He's doing all this stuff. He's branched out. Well, he's very versatile, is what I'm saying. He's an actor's actor. He's I think he's like I think he's kind of like a Dustin Hoffman type. I think he's the type of actor that can really disappear into his character and yet. Anyway, so he's very
well-rounded.
That's what I was looking for. Yes, very well-rounded. Yes, versatile. Versatile.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was on CBS Sunday Morning with Tracy Smith, the anchor, and of course, he's promoting his film about the 70s icon Halston. And I was telling Jim, I'm like, I don't have a whole lot of like pop culture knowledge of the 1970s, even though I was born in the late 70s and was fascinated by the 60s and the 50s, growing up in that culture. And then, of course, growing up in the 80s. But the 70s is a bit of like the Andy Warhols and this Halston guy. I have no idea who any of these people are. But anyway, McGregor's playing him in a movie.
Well, that's not necessarily the sort of pop culture a lot of us. We didn't pay attention to Halston. we paid attention to Star Wars.
That's right.
That's right. That's the culture that is most important. So I don't want you short selling the 70s around me ever again, because that is the decade in which Star Wars was born. And we wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for the 70s. So
I hear tell that it's kind of like reliving in the 70s right now, as a matter of fact, for a whole host of reasons. But anyway, Ewan McGregor talking about this new film. But of course, wherever Ewan goes, the subject turns to Star Wars. And here he is answering the question about what it was like to play Obi-Wan Kenobi once again.
Beautiful film in its own way, too.
And I will scrub here to that moment. And here we go.
It's been great to come back to it. It's been really exciting.
What did it feel like? Seriously, what did it feel like to put on the cloaks?
Might not be cloaks.
You can't even say that.
There may or may not be cloaks. I'm not saying anything.
Oh my goodness.
But to come back to play him again, Obi-Wan Kenobi, has been absolutely brilliant. I'm really enjoying it.
But it's not.
You're really enjoying it. It's brilliant. And just to note, there may not be cloaks.
No.
He can't say anything.
It's a nudist Obi-Wan Kenobi we're going to be running into. It's hard to distinguish where his lightsaber is actually hanging from. But no, it's going to be a new wardrobe for Ben Kenobi, something we've never seen before.
Oh, you think so? I was about to ask you if you think that we're going to see Obi-Wan in his tradition, because we've never seen him in anything else. I mean, if you go back and look at the great making of Episode 1 book, they have some of the artist, renderings of what you might do for what they might have done for Obi-Wan. and how they envisioned the Jedi. And they went through several iterations, and they finally just said, you can't mess with the classic. You go back to the inner robes and the outer robes and the tabards. They made some adjustments. They shortened the inner robe so that it was easier for the actors to do, the flips and the kicks and the fighting and all of that. But that was the only real compromise they made. Otherwise, it looked like a lift. Mm-hmm. And the one question I always had, and Jim, I think we've talked about this maybe a few times before, is that as a kid, I didn't assume that that's the way the Jedi dressed. I thought that's how they dressed on Tatooine because Owen Lars was dressed the same way.
Yeah. And even the bug-headed alien that Luke sold the land speeder to, Weasley, he wore Jedi robes. So what up? And you see various denizens of Mos Eisley walking around in similar fashion. So it's a Tatooine fashion that was adopted by the Jedi because the Jedi wore the robes of the downtrodden, Mm-hmm. They didn't go for fancy gold threaded robes
like Snoke.
They kept it. They dressed more like a peasant would, or someone living in squalor on Tatooine. That's how they did it. They did it that way to maintain the integrity of their character, essentially, because if a Jedi then grew attached to material goods like expensive clothing, that could potentially open them up to the dark side.
Okay, I see what you're getting at. So it's not so much that people were dressing like the Jedi. The Jedi were dressing like the lower class or the peasants, or because and you even like there were action figures around Episode 1. I think it was there was a Qui-Gon in Tatooine in, was it peasant disguise, or there was an Anakin Skywalker
he was just wearing a
peasant
poncho.
Right, he had the poncho.
They were ponchos, and then all of a sudden that's peasant. Right. Poncho means peasant in Star Wars universe.
Yes, I guess.
But also keep in mind when you want to compare the clothing of the Jedi, the Jedi robes that Luke Skywalker wore when he walked into Jabba's palace are very similar to what we see a lot of Jedi wearing in the prequel trilogy. It just doesn't have the earth tones. It's black. It's all black. I was hoping they were going to bring back the all black uniform that Luke was wearing when he had the showdown with Vader and the Emperor on the Death Star, with the flap.
Yeah, right.
The
infamous
gray flap that serves no purpose. Yeah. They, Captain Kirk had one of those too in the Star Trek movies.
That's right.
Just to represent any time there might be some sort of violent conflict going on that shook the Enterprise around. They would then cut away to Kirk and his little
flap was open. Like, man, there was some turbulence.
Yeah, might even be like a little speckle of blood there just to really push it over the top. But no blood in Star Wars. But the flap does come undone to demonstrate obvious.
But I'm interested in what you were saying. So you're being serious when you say that your prediction is that we will see an alternate wardrobe for this version of Obi-Wan.
Yeah, how interesting would it be to see Obi-Wan Kenobi dressed up like a typical smuggler, like Han Solo, with like a vest and a more cowboy look, with the holster at the side,
the pants with the stripe,
maybe a Carillion blood stripe.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's many different ways you can have him look, but I have a feeling that they're going to dress him up for some high adventure, and it's necessary to remove the Jedi robes because he's going to be working incognito and off the grid because of Order 66. Obviously.
But he does feel okay about wearing the robes by the time we see him in Episode 4.
Well, I predict he will be going off planet. He will be leaving Tatooine, and that will necessitate him removing the robes.
And your previous theory is that because the Jedi are wearing clothes that resemble that of peasants or maybe lower class, he doesn't stand out on Tatooine wearing that outfit. But if he goes somewhere else, then he's a mark.
Yeah, then it's like, hey, why is that guy walking around wearing those robes?
Yeah.
Those are Jedi robes, clearly. You could tell by the lightsaber hanging from his belt. No, see, if you're off the grid, you hide the laser sword. So it's going to be fun to see how he looks. And hopefully there'll be some cool merch to go along with it.
And
featuring
no kidding.
Ben and his cool,
I hope they can get their act together. I mean, I do have to give credit. The Bad Batch figures and some of that has been pumping out. You can't really grab them at retail much, at least not where I'm from, but they are out there. So I got to give credit where credit is due. I do hope that for the Obi-Wan series that, when that debuts, and the same with Book of Boba Fett, I hope that there's some merch out there. It was funny. Jim, was it you that sent me the photo that showed a photo? It was a photo of what the stores looked like when the Clone Wars movie came out, and then what the stores looked like. Did you see that when
I think I did send that
premiere or something like that?
Yes, I did send that to you.
It was crazy.
Yeah, it was side-by-side pictures of what a typical pegboard looks like at Walmart today compared to the giant displays and rows and pegs filled with merch for the Clone Wars when that was released in 2008.
Yeah.
And there was a big whoop-de-doo for the Clone Wars launch. Really big time. I somebody was saying on Facebook or somewhere, like at the official Rebel Force Radio group, they didn't recall there being really big hype for the Midnight Madness launch of the Clone Wars. But it was a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
It was a big deal. That we did a coast-to-coast show.
We sure did.
And everyone walked away with tons of merch. That all changed. When they brought back Midnight Madness for The Force Awakens. And that was one of the most frustrating nights of my life. So,
well, and not
next
only
to my wedding night, no,
that was Wendy's biggest disappointment. Not only did they do figures for Clone Wars, but if you remember, they released the Saga collection, and it was a big deal because we finally got that Yarna figure that we've been wanting so much. The 6 pooped. Sorry,
3 rows.
Boy, he didn't miss a beat. Did you hear that? 6. Who's counting? Anyway, Yarna figure. So I remember it. It was just a celebration of Star Wars in general, not just Clone Wars. But and I was reminding Mac recently that those figures on the secondary market, that whole series of Clone Wars in that animated style, those 3 3/4-inch figures are going for big money. A lot of them laid on the pegs, languished on the pegs for a long time. You can't find them anymore. They are tough to find. So if that's a hole in your collection, it's going to cost you a lot to fill it. They are. Mac's like, yeah, I got all those. I got all of them.
Well, I'm just happy.
Yeah,
I'm just happy I wasn't asleep at the wheel for those releases.
Yeah, no, it was easy to, and those 3D releases are also just crazy hard to find. Do you remember that?
Kidding me?
No. And
those things were a glut on the marketplace for a long time, and they basically began the slow decline for the 3 3/4-inch action figure. Was overproduction for the Phantom Menace once again. It's like, hello, Hasbro. It's supposed to be once bitten, twice shy, not twice bitten, twice burned, and they overproduced merch for the Phantom Menace, and it just hung there on the pegs, and they did that 3D release, and then that action figure collecting, in my opinion, hasn't been the same since.
By the way, I loved going to the theaters and seeing those in 3D. I had a great time. I loved it.
And my son Dylan were just talking about that. He was recalling that day and going to the theater because he's just recently done a rewatch of the prequels. So there's lots of questions coming my way. It's the first time he's really sat down and studied those films since he was a little kid. And he admits to me so much went over his head when he was younger.
Yeah.
And now he has lots of questions ranging from everything to midichlorians to Anakin's virgin birth and death sticks. Lots of questions about death sticks.
Want to buy some death sticks? Maybe we'll get a Death Sticks cameo in the Obi-Wan series. Who knows? That would be funny.
He asked a question. do we ever hear of Death Sticks again in any other Star Wars story following Attack of the Clones? I said, there's possibly a reference in the Clone Wars or the Mandalorian, but I'm going to have to research this one. Have Death Sticks ever been brought up again in a film or TV show or animated show?
You know, Mandalorian rings a bell. Like, I feel like we had a reference to it in a Mandalorian episode, and because I feel like I remember
Sand said something about it or something. I can't remember.
Something.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, we've got FJ coming up in the cantina, but before that, let's take a visit. We haven't been there in a while. Star Wars in pop culture. How about that?
Rebel Force Radio.
You've already made that Star Wars reference.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars parody.
Yeah, Patton Oswalt is one of those guys that I sort of love to hate. Funny guy. Love him in King of Queens. And some people have said that I look like him, and that drove me to drop 20 pounds during COVID. But
you look great, man.
Oh, thanks. But anyway, Patton Oswalt, Jim, you brought some clips of him.
Yeah, you know, Patton, he's a guy who is a well-known pop culture geek. He loves the Marvel. He loves the Star Wars, and he talks about it really whenever he has the opportunity to do so. Sometimes he even works it into his stand-up comedy bits. But as he once famously said, he wishes he could go back in time and kill George Lucas with a shovel so he doesn't make the Star Wars prequels. All right, maybe a little over the top, maybe crossing the line a little bit. But we all know time machines don't exist, and if they do, only George Lucas owns one. So you better be careful, Patton, because he's the one who's going to go back in time, not you. And he might be looking for you with a shovel, my friend. We'll get into more of George Lucas's personal technology in just a minute. But Patton appeared on the show, the Galaxy Brains TV talk show. And he shared some thoughts about the direction he'd like to see Star Wars going, and also the Mandalorian. So let's hear Patton talk about what he thinks the proper direction for Star Wars, as far as on a storytelling level, how they should continue telling those stories in a galaxy far, far away.
Mandalorian is the Star Wars story that's been done in years. To just tell that story in the movies. You don't need to keep telling the Skywalker saga finally comes to an end. It came to an end in Return of the Jedi. That was the saga. That was those 3 movies. I don't need to see the other stuff. Just think of all new characters.
So
okay.
He wants a fresh. And I think that's what Lucasfilm actually wants at this point too. That's why they made such a big deal about the end of the Skywalker saga with episode 9. Yep. George Lucas really painted them into a corner with all of his public announcements about talking to the original cast about coming back and how it was going to be centered around them and all of that. And it's going to be a direct continuation of the Star Wars story after Return of the Jedi. But I mean, wouldn't anyone go in that direction? Wouldn't that be the most natural direction to proceed? Is to complete that 9-part saga that had always been bubbling under the surface?
Well, in some fashion, I go back to the premiere of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which takes place like 80 years or something like that after the original series. And in that episode, you have a cameo by DeForest Kelley as like a 200-year-old Bones. And it wasn't a big deal. It was just a cameo, but it was to create that continuity. So I think that there has to be a handoff to a degree. It's almost like giving the fans, like endorsing the new characters, you know, like I approve of you. Okay, fans. And, you know, off the stage you go. And it's just about how you treat them. You know, it's just about how you treat those legacy characters. And there's been so much made of a show like Cobra Kai, which is, you know, silly in a sense, but the way that it has really beautifully handled the classic characters from the Karate Kid films and then used them to push, you know, new characters into the storyline. So, I mean, there's good ways to do it or effective ways to do it. I shouldn't say good and bad. There's effective ways to do it, maybe less effective ways to do it.
Yes, and I think that's the point Patton is trying to get at here. And he uses The Mandalorian as a perfect example of how to do it right. And so he continues to talk about the characters from The Mandalorian.
it's got to be characters first, and then they roam around in this universe. You care about the Mandalorian's character, and you care about the people that he meets. There's a friggin' Ugnaught voiced by Nick Nolte, and when he dies, you're like, oh my God, my heart's breaking. And Ugnaught. So like looking at these different species, and then also what I loved about The Mandalorian was Star Wars isn't just aliens, isn't just people in mass. Each of those represents a different culture. No one is good or bad. The same people aren't bad. They just are in conflict. They have different aims than other people. Luke was probably trespassing on their area. You see in The Mandalorian, if you know how to talk to them, they're just like, yeah, we're just out here trying to live, you know? Same with the Ugnaughts, same with the Jawas.
You know, I thought about last time I watched New Hope, which wasn't that long ago. It was like 2 weekends ago. I put on the 4K and was watching that scene with Luke, and he's a little cocky. He's like when he's talking to 3PO, and he's like, "Come on, let's have a look. Come on, what could happen? Let's go have a look."
It's something he does. You know, that's something that they do. Him and his buddies from Anchorhead. There's not much to do on Tatooine, so it's not like they haven't gone and
it's like cow tipping
sand people before. Yes. Very good. That's perfect. Yeah, cow tipping.
They go spy on sand people.
And also, Patton, I got to tell you, those sand people, their hands aren't all that clean, okay? They were attacking farms. They were doing all kind of crazy crap. So, I mean, how do you think I lost my damn leg?
I was just going to say, oh, my God. Don't make us go talk to Klieg about the sand people.
God, I don't got time for you jokers this week, all right? I got some repairs to do on my floating chair.
Oh, sorry, Klieg. No disrespect, man.
No, just be quiet. Oh. The sound of your voice makes me want to puke. All right, I'm getting out of here. I'm out of here.
Well, he's grizzled. I tell you, that guy is grizzled.
He's the most grizzled. He's the most grizzled of all time. I heard that.
All right, before we get to FJ, let's visit with Conan O'Brien and Seth Rogen. We love GL stories, and Seth has got some.
Yeah, this is a good one. This is kind of a flashback to a story that we covered about a decade ago. Wow. I mean, it was a long time ago, but we talked about it here on RFR. But now we actually get to hear the story from the guy who started it. I don't believe we've ever had actual audio clips of Seth Rogen telling this story about the time he met George Lucas. And George Lucas had some crazy crap to say to him. Seth Rogen had arranged a meeting with Steven Spielberg. So he was with his writing partner waiting for Spielberg to come in the room. And Spielberg surprised him by bringing in his famous friend.
He came in with George Lucas, which was
amazing,
which was mind blowing. Wow. Like they're there together. It truly, you know, for like a nerdy kid, like one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my entire life. And at which point Spielberg, if I remember, like, is kind of like making phone calls and doing some stuff as he's like, I need a few minutes, as George Lucas sits down and talks to me and Evan. At which point, very quickly, the conversation turns to like, how's it going? Not great. We're nearing the end of 2012 and the world is going to end, essentially.
What?
And
yes.
And
yes.
To which me and Evan are like, is he joking? A question that still haunts me to this day, and I think I know the answer, is, was he joking? I really don't think. It did not appear he was joking.
Oh, no.
So we tried to prod, and we're making jokes. It's like, oh, like, what's supposed to happen? It's like, oh, a giant fault is gonna, earthquake.
No, he's very seriously saying, yeah, it's a fault line.
It's a fault line. I'm like, oh, good thing the Skywalker Ranch is on the other side of the fault line. And he's like, oh, that's not a coincidence. Like, and we're like, what?
George is a prepper.
He's really thought it all. And so at which point we making a joke like, oh, well, like, if you got a spaceship to escape Earth, like, can we get a seat on that thing? And he was like, no.
Oh, no.
Which again, like, it makes me think he wasn't joking, because if you were joking, you would just say yes.
It makes me think of when we had the great Josh Robert Thompson on, and we were remarking about how George just always sounds so put upon. The guy's got more money than God. And you ask him how he's doing, and he's like, okay, I guess the world's going to end. Like, he's always got someone's raining on his parade, his $1 billion parade.
Well, he has a spaceship, just like he has a time machine, and he's not afraid to use them. So that's why I'm saying people should be very careful about what they say about George Lucas, because he might be the one seeking vengeance on you with technology. Now, this is a story, like I said, we talked about years and years ago, and it made the rounds because Seth Rogen was talking about it in the press, and it made the rounds to such a point that George Lucas had Lucasfilm rep Lynn Hale issue a statement.
Wow.
And she says he was not. She said, this is her exact statement from this was early 2011 when Seth first started telling this story. Lynn says he was not serious when he talked about the end of the world in 2012, but he is an adamant believer that the world is flat, that Stonehenge was built by aliens, and that the sun revolves around the earth. These are among the many subjects he commonly discusses at length with Elvis, who he's going to digitally insert into Indy 5 along with a roster of famous dead actors. She continues to say, Seth Rogen is a funny guy, but George and Steven are taking Chris Rock with them on the Millennium Falcon. So Chris Rock has scored a seat on George Lucas's starship, now, which is the Millennium Falcon.
Here's the thing. Lynn thinks that George wasn't serious when he dictated that memo to her.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Maybe.
She thinks it's all tongue-in-cheek.
Right. She sort of presents it like it's tongue-in-cheek, but there could have been, real undertones of a serious nature in George's voice when he told her all this. But, Seth Rogen's not the only guy who has funny George Lucas stories, but Conan O'Brien himself shares one, and this is pretty good.
The last time I ran into George Lucas, and I ran into him, and he was like, hello, Conan. I was like, oh, hello, George, good to see you. And he's like, good to see you. And I think at the end of the conversation, it was brief, but I just said, I've got to, go. I got a show to do, show to tape. And he said, you don't tape a show, you're retired. And I said, no. And he went, yes, you are. Like, he knows that, so yeah, I'm not on a network, but I'm not retired. But, so I'm not whatever. But he was telling me that I was retired. And I was saying, well, I'm not. I have a show and I also there's this and that and that. And he was kind of like, no. Almost as if I was, isn't it sad that Conan doesn't know?
You're not on my television. Therefore, you must be retired.
Either that or it's the time machine he uses.
Right.
And he just doesn't know what year it is most of the time. Where am I? Oh, 2021. Yeah, that's so funny.
I am wearing
and
plaid
Conan,
tonight in honor of George. This is sort of got a little bit of a George.
Oh, that's sharp. That's
plaid.
A good Lucas plaid. He would be envious of you, that's for sure. But Conan, he's moving to HBO. His TBS show is wrapping up. I didn't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't know that.
I've always liked Conan O'Brien
a lot.
I think he's a great guy.
Yep.
Seth Rogen had one more funny George Lucas story to share, and this one involves George Lucas visiting the set of Solo, a Star Wars story, and talking to its star, Alden Ehrenreich. So check this out.
I had heard a story that George Lucas was on the set of the Solo movie and went up to the lead actor, whose name is Alden. I don't know
Ehrenreich,
Ehrenreich,
yeah,
which Alden Ehrenreich, and went up to him and went, "Hey, congratulations on Baby Driver." And he said, "I'm not in Baby Driver." To which I was told George Lucas responded, "Are you sure?"
Classic. And what's funny about that is Ansel, what's his name? Baby Driver. Ansel Elgort or whatever. He's got a weird name, but he's great in Baby Driver, right?
Yep.
And if you watch Baby Driver, you're looking at that guy going, now this guy would be a great young Han Solo. He's got the size, he's got the sort of demeanor, he's got the sneer. when I was watching that movie, I was thinking of Han Solo. Also, it didn't hurt he was wearing a black vest with a white T-shirt, So I think that was kind of, or he was wearing a shirt that sort of looked like that. And if I remember correctly, and I thought, wow, he would have been great. And a lot of people felt that way, but Ansel apparently auditioned very poorly, and so he even admitted it was a rotten audition for Solo. But they did see him for that. So George must have confused Alden with the Baby Driver guy. He goes, "Are you sure?"
It's kind of like, and no disrespect to George, but when your parents start to get older and they confuse actors and actor names.
Yes.
All
the time. Yeah, I do it all the time myself.
Yeah, like SNL did a great sketch where they had the mom translator, where she would be like, Joe Geronimo, and it was like Jake Gyllenhaal, So
right. That's a funny bit. Yeah.
It's great. So I wonder if this is the George version of that, but instead of him talking to his kids and grandkids, he's talking to the real people.
Yeah,
you were that guy in that movie, yeah. That one movie.
Elgort.
Yeah,
Ansel Elgort. I had to look it up.
Yes.
Ansel Elgort. But he's fabulous at Baby Driver. And George must have really enjoyed that. Oh, he's good. He's good. Han Solo, maybe. And then Alden is
funny.
Just like, wah, wah. But that's how it goes in Hollywood, especially when it's the end of the world, according to George Lucas.
Hey, I'm Ray Parker. I play Darth Maul, and you're listening to Rebel Force Radio.
In the heat of battle, my father wove a tapestry of obscenity that, as far as we know, is still hanging in space over Lake Michigan.
Where are you going, Master? For a drink?
Sorry about the mess. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
Well, looky here. We've got him in the cantina where he belongs.
It looks terrible.
FJ DeSanto.
I'm not used
How
to
are
these
you, brother?
These visual versions now. I miss the old days of lounging around on my couch and
yeah, me too sometimes. But we got to roll with the changes. It's not easy for old guys like us.
Fancy now. It's all very fancy and high tech.
Fancy.
And, this guy's on Coruscant. Shit's moving in the background. It's pretty fancy.
We do what we can, man. You can't handle the reality of what's going on behind here. Let me tell you.
I can't handle the reality of anything at this point.
Well, FJ, it's actually great to have you. I was just saying earlier that what I really appreciate.
Oh, there's a droid. There was a fucking droid behind you.
There is. Every once in a while, R2. Yeah, there he goes. There he goes. He just went off that way.
Where did you get? Wait, are you in Padme's bedroom, creepy?
I'm in the boudoir. I'm in the boudoir of Padme.
What are you doing? What is going on here? What have you become?
I'm out of it for a little while, and now you're in Padme's bedroom. What I appreciate so much about your point of view is, as a guy who has stepped into a franchise like Transformers with multiple storylines and accepted canons and extremely passionate fans and all of that, and you're sort of at the helm of the animation side of it, you know probably better than most what it's like for a creative to step into a world that has a lot of track before you got involved, and obviously has, as I say, a huge and passionate fan base. So it's been really interesting to hear your point of view throughout this whole process, where Star Wars, the mantle of Star Wars, has been picked up by others and carried on. Can you relate to that?
I do. I feel like the Transformers experience has given me a different perspective, like you said, and when you start, I find myself more sympathetic if that makes sense. I find myself more sympathetic to the people who have to do this stuff. And, you know, the Transformers experience, which I'm just literally at the tail end of. My experience is about to end with this third season, and it's going to come out at the end of July. In particular, is very tricky. You know, whereas the first two seasons we were dealing with, you know, a sort of homage successor to G1 original Transformers. The big twist on the third season is Beast Wars, because it's the 25th anniversary this year, and they haven't been in animation since, you know, the original show. So this is the first time they're coming back. So I'm fully expecting whenever the trailer drops in the next month or whatever, I haven't seen it yet, that I'm going to get crucified for, you know, for something. Because, and this is to go into with the Star Wars thing, is that's the first time Beast Wars in particular is a second generation of Transformers. So there's a different expectation, whereas for my age group, which we're all around, is the G1 experience like it was New Hope, right?
Yes.
And then you have, like, a lot of kids who work for me, some of the writers on the show, started with Beast Wars, you know, and I'm off in college during Beast Wars, so I didn't really know it as well. And so there's a different expectation of what the, you know, or different expectation and a different viewpoint, whereas, you know, a lot of our generation looked at the prequels and sort of went, fuck it. You know what I mean? Like, you ruined Star Wars. That's how a lot of G1 fans feel about Beast Wars, right? So it becomes this, I'm sympathetic, you know, it's very different when it comes to Lucas, because there's a certain degree of, well, if Lucas came up with this, you can't mess with that, right? You can't, like, it's his prerogative, it's his money, you know, and it's his world, right? When you get into the Disney era of Star Wars, I think it's a different conversation, which we can get to. And so same thing with Transformers. Transformers is a very tricky thing. There's not a creator, right? There's not like a Lucas character, and there's a romanticized vision of the original incarnation of it that you're constantly competing against, or being, not competing against, but being held to a romanticized standard of versus what it actually really is, right? So I'm sure I've said this before, but for me, my gateway into Batman was the '66 show, which I wasn't born when it came out, but it was in reruns. So my first exposure to Batman is that show, right? And I remember Cesar Romero as a Joker, and I'm talking like I'm like 3-4 years old, scared shitless of the guy, right? And but then I got to like 6 or 7, and I thought, what the hell was that about, right? But you had that romanticized vision of that character and that incarnation in the head. And then as you get older, then I became like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then you're into the comics and you're into Frank Miller, Batman, all that shit. And then when you get into like your 20s and you're sort of out on your own in the world, you then have a nostalgia and that romanticized view. Oh, that was so much fun. And then you learn to appreciate what it is, right? The problem with Transformers is not a problem, and I say that in quotes, is I shouldn't say there's a problem. The difference between Transformers and Star Wars is up until a certain point with Star Wars, there were just 3 movies and that was it, right? Like, and the benchmark is so fucking high, right? Whereas Transformers, they never stopped really doing it. So by the time you get to when I started in the world of Transformers, which is, 6, 7 years ago, you had 30 years of so many different incarnations of it that, you could sort of sit there and then now taking that into account, you're starting to deal with the toy people who sort of sit there and say, this is what we're doing. And you need to play ball with that, whereas Star Wars, it's sort of the opposite, where it's like the toy line needs something. All right, we're going to go do Rebels. We're going to go do Resistance. We're going to do these kid-oriented things because we know it'll sell this much. Transformers is more toy-driven than they are the entertainment-driven, right? It's almost like the opposite. So we're sitting there, and I'm very proud of what we've done with Transformers in terms of the synergy between the entertainment and the quote-unquote product, right? because we sat there and went, the more, and I said this to Hasbro really early on, because I had done the Prime Wars trilogy, the digital series that I did before this, which I didn't start as the showrunner, but learned a lot during that process. And that was almost like what I call graduate school for Transformers, because then when we got to the big show, this one, the Netflix one, we were able to sit there and say, okay, here's what we learned on that. And the first thing you could say to Hasbro was, the more you tell me what you're doing with the toys, the more I can implement that into the show. And the more I can make it seem organic, and it's not a commercial for toys. And I might have told this story on one of the other shows, but I don't know if you guys know a guy named Flint Dilley. Flint was one of the key writers of the original show.
Yeah, they named the G.I. Joe character after him, Flint.
Right.
Exactly. So just before COVID, we had him come to the production office. Like we had hung out in New York at Toy Fair, and I said, "Why don't you come to because really it's a love letter to the stuff that these guys did, right?" And we put him in a conference room. We put it on the big screen, and I was really nervous, because especially the opening of our first season, literally it's a ripoff of G1, the original opening, but it was an homage. You know what I mean when I say ripoff. Sure. And he watched 10 minutes of it, and he was sort of awestruck by it, and he said, stop. And we stopped the show. And he goes, I feel sorry for you guys. I said, why? He goes, when we did this 30 years ago, we didn't think anybody was going to care about it after it played one time, or maybe twice in a rerun. There was no VCRs yet, VHS. There was no cable, or cable was just starting. There was no concept of this. So what we were doing was getting faxes from Hasbro. So we're saying, here are the toys. Here are the names of the toys. Put them in the show. And he goes, we literally were making commercials for toys. He goes, and I didn't realize for a very long time the impact it had on a generation, meaning our generation. We would have, he said, not necessarily taken it more seriously, but we would have been more attentive to things that were just omissions or mistakes, they just colored this seeker over here wrong, are now toys. People, they're variants. They're variant toys, and we did that like crazy in the show. And I get my ass kicked by that fan base all the time. And why is this? Why is it and then? But I mean, to sit there and Hasbro literally did an exclusive toy line based on our show for all 3 seasons. There's 20 odd figures that are literally based on designs, including one I sort of created the backstory for and all this stuff, which is an exclusive in Japan. I'm waiting for them to send it to me.
How cool. I mean, very few people can say that. I mean, that's contributing to something very significant in pop culture.
Yeah. My goal now, I've done this, right, is I'm going to be that 80-year-old guy at the Burbank Marriott, with those bot cons and whatever the hell they do, sort of telling these stories when I'm 80 and all this stuff, and just sort of being like that guy. But meeting Flint Dilley was nuts, because, or having him come in and see it was nuts, because he was basically you'd sit there and be like, that was from G1. He's like, dude, I never watched them again. You know what I mean? We went on to G.I. Joe. We had to make a living. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's what's fascinating. And I think, to bring it back to a Star Wars context, I think it's a very, I don't know how they operate, but, I'd like to think we're more spiritually aligned with what they're doing with Mandalorian and all that stuff, and sort of here's trying to do new things in the world that exists already as an homage, and finding those little pockets. I mean, again, I'm repeating myself from whenever the last time I was here, is if I told you that we speak in Star Wars when we develop these things, from the music, even like this one's our Return of the Jedi, because they're in jungles and shit like that. There are certain shots and lines you'll sit there and go, hey, that's Star Wars, that's Star Trek, that's all these things, because they're just, we're at a point now where everything's a love letter to everything. You know what I mean? Because we're the first generation really of fandom, right? Yes. Starting in the late 70s, early 80s. So the first generation of fandom, and it's fascinating now watching, my nephew's now going to be 23, Jesus. but like has a romanticized view of the prequels.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because that was his first movie going experience, and I think history now is starting to be a little kinder to the prequels, and maybe and that's the other thing we learned, and it's sort of like, okay, now you kind of like the prequels because you hate the sequels, and then something else will come out and you'll sort of like the sequels, right? What we learned on Transformers, but we learned, we have a running gag on Transformers is whatever's new they hate, and then when something else comes, like our first season came out, right? It gets like 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, like average people really like it. Diehard fans, well, we hate it, we hate you, all this stuff. Then the second season comes out, it's like, we hate this. Yeah, the first season was so much better. Like, he did so much cool shit in the first one. So I just know when the third one comes out, it's like, fuck this. We love the second season. And, oh, you ruined Beast Wars. And then they'll do something with the Beast Wars characters, 5 years from now, long after I'm out of the Transformers world, and they'll be like, no, that FJ show was so much better. Like,
do you ever, FJ, when you're doing this and you're making these decisions, do you ever, because you say that your Star fandom influences you quite a bit, and you have these Star Wars moments that you incorporate kind of into your writing and storytelling. But do you ever, when you're making a decision about a Transformers character or situation, do you ever make that leap of, well, how would I feel if this was Star Wars and they did this to Luke or they did this to Leia? Do those sort of decisions get informed by your fan? You put yourself in their shoes.
But you have to. The thing, though, is what we try to do with Transformers is we have sort of parameters of the sandbox, right? Which is, okay, it's G1. It's the 86 movie, right? Mm-hmm. And we stay within those parameters of how to be consistent with the characters. Like right now the fan base hates my version of Optimus Prime. They hate him, etc., because he's not the heroic leader and blah, blah, blah. But the idea is it was a prequel. Like, the idea is, like, by the time this is over, now you see where he is, and you go into G1 and he was the hero, right? So, like, smarter than him, he gets outplayed by Megatron, all this shit, right? And but literally, you'll have lines where somebody will say to him, like, "This is where you become the hero you're supposed to be," and fans are like, "Wow, no, that's not Optimus." Well, the guy just said, you know what I mean? Like, he's learning, and I think the problem becomes, I'm not going to bring Last Jedi into it, but like,
yeah, you are.
Yeah, why don't you?
Come on,
how
I've already started to.
Like if I was doing a Transformers, like when we did the previous Transformers, which was considered a sequel to G1, there was, I think the character of Optimus is lame in that, but because we had the original voice, I think people accept it in a different way. I think that was another thing, is, and sort of the lessons you learned. But the Last Jedi comparison is, okay, you look at Luke in Last Jedi, and how do you track that consistently with the 7 movies that come before it, including the prequels, right? How do you track that arc, even though he's not even born in those original movies, or in the prequels? Mm-hmm. How do you track who he is by the time you get there? And that's why it doesn't work for me, right? Because it's like, you're not giving, like, I can accept him as this angry, guy, I'm just here to die. I can get that. But you've got to give the information that got,
yes,
tracks it and gets it there.
Yes.
Right? So that's on Transformers. We're sitting there almost reverse tracking it.
Yes.
Right. So Luke, like when he's a farm boy, he doesn't know shit, right? Like Obi-Wan's got to change. He's naive and all this stuff. And I stand by with Last Jedi, by the way, like in particular, that if you pitched me that movie and I hadn't seen it, I would think it was the greatest Star Wars movie ever, right? Like on paper, when you talk about it, it's a great. Everything's great. The execution's wrong. The whole thing's fucking wrong, right? And subsequently, when you get into Rise of Skywalker, you're forced to shoehorn a bunch of shit, which I sort of relate, because when we did the first Transformers series, the original showrunner, in my opinion, like fucked up the whole thing. Right, like, because he just wanted to do what he wanted. He didn't, etc. So by the time he gets fired in the middle of the second one and they bring me back, and subsequently they go, oh, by the way, you're going to have a third season. It's like, oh, shit. Right? You can see the storytelling's different.
Does that, I was going to say, does that immediately change? When you know that you've got season 3, that changes the game.
It changes. This isn't the Netflix one. This was the digital one, right? So it's less of a microscope. But those lessons, like when we did this Transformers, right, which is a total 18 episodes, we did the thing they didn't do with Star Wars, is we sat there before we wrote a script, drew anything, etc. I went, locked myself up, and wrote with one of the other producers a 15, 20-page Bible that said, here's everything that's going to happen in these 3 seasons, 18 episodes, right, through 2021, right? And I gave it to Netflix, and I gave it to Hasbro, and I gave it to Machinima / Rooster Teeth, and I said, we're all going to get on the same page now. And that way there are no surprises later. And, you know, and there were certain things, like there were certain characters, they were like, okay, and then they were like, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that because of the continuity and all that shit, right?
Okay.
And which is a big difference when you're in the development stage versus, oh shit, I already have animatics of this character doing this, and it's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars to change it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that, you know, so we can't pivot at all. I mean, there's certain things creatively that we like there's a character called Alita 1. She's the female lead of the whole thing. Everything she does in the second season was never in the treatment. The character developed, and I mean, Hasbro was literally like, we're never going to make a toy of her. You can do whatever you want with her. And then, of course, they saw the scripts and they were like, we're going to make a toy out of her. And I was like, great. And it became one of their biggest selling toys this past year. I don't even have one. And that was my subtle hint in case anybody watches. But we expanded that, and things change as you write. But everybody at least is sitting there understanding in advance, like this passing the baton shit with Star Wars didn't fucking work, right? So by the time you get to the Rise of Skywalker, you're sitting there going, listen, we're going to put Harrison in this. We're going to put Mark in this because we don't have blah, blah. And you have to pivot, but you have to have a roadmap with these things.
That's just it. And FJ, one of the things that became clear in looking at these Reddit rumors, which I know that you listened to the show and heard us speculating on them, and I think you have a different story to tell, or your experience in the industry makes you think that things might have happened differently. But the biggest question, and you kind of hinted about it with Transformers, the biggest question I think on most fans, particularly maybe that OG fan's mind, is why there wasn't a story developed up front.
I can't answer that. I have no clue. And it baffles me. And it baffles me that you literally didn't at least sit there and go, this is how it starts, this is where it ends.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, I mean, it's that simple. And I don't know how you could sit there and spend, money that's 1,000 times more than what we're spending on, these tiny Transformer shows, and not think that through, right? And not sit there and definitive, and like I said, it's okay to pivot as you go.
Yeah.
But if you're, I could almost accept it if they were back to the old school. I'm going to date myself a little bit, but we're all old. If they were back to the original 3-year gap, because I always felt like the 3-year gap, right? Yeah. The problem with the 2-year gap is by the time you're finishing one movie, you're making the next one. You don't have a choice if you're going to make that release date, right? The beauty of the 3-year gaps was always there was that 1 year to sort of process and think about it.
Interesting.
And sit there and go, okay, we're going to get into production, but we live in this, and I don't think it would have killed anybody to have a Star Wars thing every 3 years, right? But for some reason, there was this plan of, we're going to do, remember the original plan was, alternate years between chapter movies and, you know, Star Wars stories.
Yeah, the standalone stuff.
Yeah, standalone. And I think they were ill-equipped. And it's sort of, you know what it is, and this is another conversation, especially with all the Warner Brothers and DC stuff going on, is somebody was sitting there and going, look at what Marvel does. You know, and what people need to understand is you cannot in any way, shape, or form replicate Marvel, no matter what. It's a 1 in a million thing. It's a 1 in a gazillion thing. The system, the process, the assembly line of it cannot be replicated in Star Wars, DC, anything, because it's all about one person's vision, right? It's all about, you know, Feige is this generation's George Lucas, right? So he's handing a generation their mythology, their fandom, etc. And I think if you had the 3-year gap, you could sit there and go, okay, Force Awakens came out. We have a little bit of distance from it. What works, what doesn't, what needs to be addressed, etc. Because then you hear all those stories, and we've all heard these stories. It's like, well, Ryan asked JJ to cut this and you know, change that and blah, 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 blah. And you're sitting there as a filmmaker, like, you don't want to do that, right? Like if somebody was saying to me, like, could you change this in Transformers? And you're like, you know, 90% of the way into the show and it's coming out. You're like, fuck, dude, like, that throws my whole thing off. You know what I mean? Like, and again, I'm saying this not knowing the process, but it's like, you're talking about, you know, these are major filmmakers. And I you know, and the problem now is with the TV show, they've proven what they could have been doing, right? Like a connected universe, and you can do new while respecting the old. You know what I mean? Like you can do all that. And again, you know, the big problem is Rogue One legitimately is a masterpiece. Like, it's a masterpiece.
You're one of those.
Yeah, I think Rogue One is I think it's a masterpiece, and I think it's the template in terms of the storytelling for Mandalorian and what's going to come after this, in terms of how to do different things in the existing universe. The mistakes they've made on the sequel trilogies are nearly catastrophic to the franchise, but I think streaming and TV has sort of saved it. For now, in terms of storytelling, because I think we can take a step back and know Filoni and Favreau can be trusted, and you know, I think the Obi-Wan show is going to be, you know, really good and really, you know, a positive step forward. And I think
I hope so.
I hope so. Based on what I know about it, I'm very confident in the Obi-Wan show. And I just think Deborah Chow's great. Like, I think she's, you know, like, I think you need people with a vision who understand it. And I think cutting her teeth in the Star Wars world on Mandalorian helps.
Yeah,
and
no doubt about it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's a different world. And I think you can do these things economically, you know, because they're shooting Obi-Wan here.
In your house.
Like, literally. Yeah. But
FJ just pointed, you know, over to the kitchen. That's where the blue milk's being poured.
So, you know, so they're not shooting in England, and I you know, so I know some people working on it and who seem very enthusiastic about what the approach is for it. So,
oh, that's great news. Enthusiasm. That's what we need as a fan base. Hey, FJ, what do you say to people who respond to those who criticize the sequel trilogy when we say they screwed up by not going into it with a solid game plan for the entire trilogy? They were just making it up as they go along. Oftentimes I'll hear sequel trilogy apologists say, well, George Lucas was just making it up as he went along too. What's the difference?
The difference is he's the creator. I mean, in the end, that's it. You know what I mean? Like, in the end, he didn't answer to. So you can hate the prequels all you want, but he don't answer to anybody. It's his money. Like I said before, it's his money. It's his vision. So that's it. You know, it's his company. Like, you know, like when you think about it, he owns every aspect or owned every aspect of those movies, right? Like down to the effects company, down to this, down to that, you know, like, you know, I think my love of it or the appreciation of it as I get older increases. You know, like I still have issues with Phantom Menace and the technology looks dated in Attack of the Clones, and Sith still looks really good though.
FJ, something that I'd never heard anybody talk about, and I just want to go back to it because I think it's very significant when you talked about the 3-year gap versus the 2-year gap, and that I've always, you know, as a fan thought that, well, it was 3 years because it had to be because of the technical, you know, the limitations of the technology.
It did.
But what you're saying that it also gave was perspective. It gave, so when people, I'm just thinking when people raise that question about George, well, George Lucas also made it up as he went along. Well, first of all, he also had some structure of a narrative spanning multiple films. And the second thing is he took that time between films and had that perspective, which was not possible for the sequel trilogy.
I mean, do you think really, if he didn't have that gap, I guarantee you Jar Jar is fighting in the Camino arena. Another, you know what I mean? Not,
yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, wait, is it not Camino? What's the planet at the end?
Geonosis.
Geonosis.
A big star.
You know, yeah. Like I guarantee you, because like if he did it, because it allows you to pivot. It allows you to understand what the audience reacted to, and the other thing is this. It also, the 3-year gap, in my opinion, and I learned this when I was involved with the Batman stuff, like really early on in my career, like super early on. You know, when I was a kid, that gap also creates a demand. Mm-hmm. It's out of your consciousness for a bit. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it used to be the movie came out, then you'd have a year later the VHS would come out, a year later it would go to TV, and it's sort of like, you know, it sort of fades, and then boom, here's the new one. Right? But also, and to your point, yeah, it did in those days, you needed that time to mount a production. Mm-hmm. But also you had that time to sit there and go, well, people really like this and that, and we more of this or less of that, etc. Like, I guarantee you, with this Transformers, if I had a 6-month gap in between seasons, the show probably would have been different based on the reactions to it. But the thing is, especially in animation, it's economical to just keep everybody working. You know, like, because then what happens is that if you stop, people go to different projects and you got to bring everybody back. You might not get everybody, all that shit, right? So it's from a financial point of view, it makes more sense. So, you know, like when they did the, I don't know if this is public, but you learn something, is when they did the Michael Bay live action movies, whatever he did, like those 5, like from the beginning to the one he left, he basically, everybody on those movies, on a sort of design, production, effects sort of level, not the sort of like day-to-day on set people, but they were on salary that entire time, so he never let them go. So even like they were constantly, like he'd sit there and be like, hey, I have this idea for this set piece in between movies, and people just, like, it was a great gig for a lot of people for 10 years because it actually saved them money, as opposed to, we got to do new contracts and bring everybody back, or this person's not available. Even he kept artistic staff working for editors, all the shit, effects people, for years, because that was more financially sound to do that, right? And you know, but when you really think about it, it's not different than ILM. It's like George could just walk upstairs or wherever and just be like, listen, I got this idea for, you know, this character, this world, go draw it, all that shit. But
hey, FJ, what do you think about this? And then I really want to get into some of these Reddit rumors with you. J.J. Abrams revealed this week that he's not leaning toward working with Warner Brothers on Superman or another DC Comics hero. He wants to focus more on his own original ideas. And he said, he revealed something, a very interesting quote. He says, I know that Hollywood is a place where it used to be that people would be inspired by something they would see, or an old film, or a show, or something, and think, oh, here's my response to that. Here's a version of that. Now it's become a place where more often than not, you see something and people get inspired by it and go, let's redo that exact same thing. And so he's not into that anymore. He just wants to get on with some of his own original ideas. Do you think Hollywood suffers? He's full of shit.
No, he's full of shit. And I'll tell you what.
Yeah, please.
He signed a multi-gazillion-dollar deal with Warner Brothers, right? They're already he's already developing Justice League Dark and TV, and he's not going to direct Superman, but he's going to produce it. Okay, but also as a director, he's not full of shit. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, and I, this is a big problem. It's funny you bring this up. I'm going to pivot to a different franchise. Is a franchise I literally don't give a shit about at all, and that's Avatar. And when they said, look, here's the release date for Avatar 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yes.
Which it literally did. Literally, I'm sitting there going, what a waste of a filmmaker. The amount of money and time, I want to see James Cameron direct something new. I want to see James Cameron use all this technology and all his clout to launch more new ideas. I don't want Avatar 4 and 5. I don't even remember the first one. Like, no one gives a shit, right? But what'll happen is the second one will come out and be the biggest movie of all time. I guarantee you, it'll be the biggest movie of all time because now it's a gimmick with Cameron, right? Like, Titanic was the biggest one. We got to go see Avatar. It's the biggest one of all time. Next one could be like. But what happens when you get to the fourth one? Like, are you really going to make these blue people that fucking compelling? Right? So to go back to your thing about JJ is, JJ should go create something new, because that's the only opportunity in this day and age, especially in the streaming world, is what you're going to see, especially when you watch the stuff that's going on with Warner Brothers right now and studios for sale and everybody's consolidating, is you're going to see 3 tiers of entertainment, right? Like, especially with the feature stuff, right? You're going to see the event movies that we know, Disney, Star Wars, Marvel, Fast and the Furious, all that stuff, the $100+ million event movie. That's what's going to keep people, especially in a post-COVID world, coming to the cinema. Like,
hopefully a new James Bond movie, we can get that.
Yeah, it's going to come. It's going to come, right? And then on the other spectrum, the other movie event is going to be like the 20 million and under, like Conjuring movies, horror, etc. Like genre stuff done at a fraction of the cost that is affordable and makes a lot of money, right? Horror, Quiet Place, things like that. Like the Get Out, things like that, right? And then all the middle stuff, right, is going to be on streaming. That's what streaming is going to be good for. The $40 million movie, the drama, like Angelina Jolie's movie that just came out. Like, no one goes to the movie theater. No one's going to go see that, right?
Right.
But they'd watch it on streaming. You know who the smartest? You know who the smartest movie star in the world is? Is Reese Witherspoon, right?
Why?
Because Reese Witherspoon went and was the first one to do high-end premium streaming shows. She went and did Big Little Lies. She did all these other things. She did the thing with Kerry Washington. Those are all streaming shows because no one would see those things in a movie theater, but they'll definitely see it on streaming, and they'll definitely watch her. Nicole Kidman's another one like that. They're doing all these shows. They can do high-end, premium, smart shows, not genre, dramas, etc. That's where it's going to go, right? So we're in this world now of a JJ, or Chris Nolan, etc. They have the opportunity, to use that clout to launch new things. I don't want to see JJ direct a Superman movie. I want to see JJ do something new. I don't want to see Avatar 4, 5, 6, whatever. Give me something new. Like, it could be with the same people. Like, I want to see Cameron with Schwarzenegger again, right? Like, that's me being an old man, but you get the idea. It's like, but let's see something new, right? Like, what is that thing that's going to, like, Mission Impossible 20 years ago, it was like, okay, it's Mission Impossible. Now they're doing 7 and 8 back to back, right? So what's the next one? How do you sit there and launch the next franchise? And those what those guys should be doing. The JJs of the world, the Nolans, should be, you know, that's why I like Tenet a lot, because, and I like when Nolan does Inception, because those to me, like, oh, that's fresh new genre with movie stars, with cool actors. He could have done 10 more Inceptions, but he doesn't. Does Interstellar. That's cool.
Because we're the original, and I like what you said earlier about sort of the original fandom age, the original fandom generation. Because of that, have we kind of imprisoned ourselves in our own fandom? Is that why there's so much?
I think the age of the nerd is over, right? Like I think the age of the nerd is over, and I think it's all cannibalizing itself. To your point, but the problem is, it has to do with the fact that first generation, and now there's a couple under us, when they reach that point of disposable income, etc., and that nostalgia that I was talking about earlier, you're going to go right to that. You're going to go right to, you know, all that shit. That's why Batman's so successful, you know. But Batman, you know, there's how many variations of Batman? You know what I mean? Like
every generation has their Batman.
But that's like Transformers, right? But that's the problem Star Wars didn't have, right? Star Wars had 2 generations. Star Wars had original trilogy generation, prequel generation. And we hated that first generation hates the second one. Now, we sort of love it because the sequel generation, everybody hates the sequel generation, right? But the thing is, there's a generation that we don't know about, like your kids' age, who grew up with Rey, especially girls, stuff like that, who grew up with Rey. That's going to mean something. And that's why I always said, I'm sure I've said it on here before, is I think in 5 years, 10 years, you can bring Rey, Finn, Poe back for a movie. It doesn't have to be, and not everything has to be a trilogy, etc. But you can bring them back in a way that I think is very, very meaningful. You know what I mean? Like, and start fresh and sort of say, well, here's Finn, now he's a Jedi. You know what I mean? And all this shit. Like, that's all I kept thinking about, because, you know, they announced Attack the Block sequel with Boyega yesterday.
Right.
And, you know, I kept thinking, like, what a lost opportunity. That, you know, this sort of goes into the rumor thing, the Reddit bullshit, but what they were going to do with Finn and all that stuff. And, you know, it's like, yeah, if I was Boyega, I'd be furious too that the character, especially in the second movie, gets buried entirely.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean? Like, just it's a disaster for that character in particular. And, you know, the Trevorrow script, which after listening to you guys, I went back and looked. I had one of the versions of the script, the one where Carrie Fisher was still alive. Version. I never saw the version that he tweaked after. But the version of that where, and you guys talked about it on the other show, of Finn leading a resistance on Coruscant. Yes. I don't know how you don't sit there and be like, we're going to keep that. We're going to keep that part. You know what I mean? Like that was just like,
how was that a bad idea?
Yeah, like you know, like just fucking do that, right? But there's a value to those characters that people don't get yet, because that generation's not old enough, right? And when you talk about boxing ourselves in, it's because we got disposable income and never got a Tarkin figure from Kenner. Right? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? You see what I'm saying? Like, it's like, you remember that shit. Like, well, my blue snaggletooth, you know, like, where was it? You know, like that kind of thing. And I think that's really interesting. And like, because I mean, like I don't buy the figures anymore. I haven't bought the figures in a year, just because it got to a point where it's too much. It's just like, whoa, you know, like I can't. Like, if there's one cool one or rare one, like, oh, this is cool, like I gotta have this one, like, you know, like I was in Japan and I saw Han Solo figure arts thing, and it's like, oh shit, looks just like him, I gotta get that. You know what I mean? Like, like that kind of thing, or Qui-Gon one and all that shit. You know what I mean? Like, my Star Wars buying is now simply based on what pulls my heartstring. You know, like as opposed to collecting. And I got to get all this shit, right? Like, you know, when the sequels came out, I was like, I got to get the Poe Dameron figures. You know, like, okay, that's my.
We all know, all RFR listeners know what a fan FJ is of the Poe Dameron character.
Did you see what? You didn't see when you sign into this
Oh, I saw
whatever thing.
Yeah,
post boyfriend. I thought it was gonna come up on the screen.
Yeah, I should have. I should have done that. I don't know if there's a way to let me see if I could. I can't bring it in, but yeah. So you label yourself as you come into the show, and yes, FJ is Poe's boyfriend, and proud of it. Well, that does lead us into these Reddit rumors. I mean, just to start, kind of on a broader scale, what was it about our not our coverage of them, but what was it about these rumors in particular that you were like, I don't think so.
I think it's because I thought, especially after, I guess Jimmy sent me the link to it, and it looked like someone had sourced a bunch of different topics and sort of made up their own thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I think some of it is like, here's a kernel of truth, here's bullshit, and here's whatever. And that movie in particular was, like, it's fascinating. Hollywood is so stupid to begin with. But when that first movie came out, when Force Awakens came out, I went into that basically knowing the whole movie, right? Like for some reason, when JJ does a movie, it all leaks, right? When Last Jedi was being made, no leaks, right? Like it was, yeah. And then when Rise of Skywalker, I actually knew people on the movie, so it was like, I mean, I remember getting a call, I don't know how, 6, 8, 9 months before they're like, it's the villain's Palpatine. And I was like, say what? Right? And, oh yeah, they're doing this thing, and he's going to come back, and it's a clone, and all this shit. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I love that idea. I don't necessarily love the execution of it, but the idea of it is really interesting. And so I think, we live in this weird culture, and this goes into the Justice League stuff too. And I keep going back to Last Jedi, which I feel bad about, but I don't. And which is fans, because they're so saturated with everything now for decades of fandom, whatever your respective fandom is, just DC, Marvel, Transformers, Star Wars, Star Trek, sorry, I don't know what the hell that's the Obi-Wan
your
shit.
rides here.
And that's Obi-Wan. And but they're so saturated that everybody has their perception of what it needs to be. And when you don't get it, or people don't get it, like Last Jedi is, and this applies to, in my opinion, Justice League also, is you have people making things in the gaps that are there, right? They're filling in the gaps of shit in their head versus what's actually on screen. Right. So I was never an EU guy, right? I was never a big EU guy, and I was simply not an EU guy because Lucas said, well, that's the EU. I said, then I don't give a shit. If it's not really part of the universe, I don't give a shit. Right? Now we're in the age where every book means something and all that stuff, and I can't keep up. So I rely on you guys and Paul and Kyle to sort of sit there and go, well, Leia did this because of this, right? And so, well, that would have been better in the movie, And so the problem becomes when you start thinking of the franchise versus the film and what's in front of you and what's on screen and what's being presented to you. Because we always had the vivid imaginations where we just made shit up of who this was in the background, etc. Now the problem is there's people on staff who sit there and go, that's what that person is. And by the way, I love that. My favorite Star Wars books in these years, in these last 10, 15 years, are the visual dictionaries. I go absolutely crazy. Like, I used to love the making of books, and you guys mentioned this in the last show. They don't do making of books anymore. But that's it. That was a JJ thing, by the way. They did that. He pulled that shit on Star Trek also, because so much changes.
Right.
But those visual dictionaries I love. Like, Pablo's great with those books. Like, sit there and I love it and I get it and I'm like, oh, okay, this is this person and all this shit, right? The problem has become is now you can't understand the fucking movie without reading the book.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
like,
I've had so many friends, FJ, I've had so many friends come to me, as the Star Wars friend in their life, and say, I had no idea Palpatine was a clone. What? I mean, some of these things that weren't explicitly or, very, very explicitly brought out in the movie. And I go, yeah, didn't you see that in the visual guide?
It's like filmmakers, they prioritize mystery. They want the big reveal that blows your mind. Everyone's chasing the Luke, no, I am your father moment. They're all chasing it. And so they sacrifice traditional linear storytelling to create this puzzle the characters have to work their way through. Rey doesn't know who she is and all of that. It's just, it leads to viewer fatigue, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the problem becomes it becomes a brick wall. No pun intended for the one in back of me. For the average. For the average,
FJ coming to us from the improv tonight.
Exactly.
That's the.
I'll do some comedy.
World famous.
But I think to your point, yeah, that you sit there and you have to, you need to go into it basically understanding that the whole world knows the 3 original movies. The prequels, to what extent they know these 2 guys fight, one goes into the lava and becomes Darth Vader and the other guy is Obi-Wan, right? Like when you really sum up the prequels, that's the big fucking takeaway.
You're right.
Yes.
So everybody, and the problem is the 3 original movies are so imprinted in our DNA. And the other problem becomes, especially when you get to like Rise of Skywalker, is you're in a situation now where the stakes are so high with these movies. These are corporate giant investments. And even without Disney, if Lucas had made these, it's the same stakes, right? It's the same financial stakes, same business stakes. It's the same thing, right? I'm not one of those people who actually thinks, well, if George had done it, it would have been better or worse, etc. Until somebody eventually, years from now, leaks what George's treatments for this were, etc. I still don't understand why he started that process and then backed out, but that's neither here nor there. You have to be referential to what came before in order to push it forward. The Mandalorian, again, now we have the case in point, which we didn't have during the sequel trilogy. We didn't have the Mandalorian, where you could sit there and be like, well, motherfucker, that's how, that's how you do it,
it's
right?
the answer. It's the answer to people who always say, you don't like current Star Wars because you can't go back to your childhood and recreate that moment, that sense of awe and wonder that you have as a kid with the original trilogy. It's impossible to replicate that because you can't go back in time. And The Mandalorian, I think, absolutely debunks statements like that.
Yeah, and by the way, it did that before they even brought Luke into it, right?
Oh, yes.
So even just the first
Absolutely.
season, the thing is, the first season is like this weird Trojan horse, right? Of like, hey, we're going to bring you into this pocket of Star Wars that you don't know about, right? Like this little pocket. And we're going to get you invested in this little Yoda guy, right? Because in the end, it's such a simple story, right? And then the second season, we're going to sucker punch you with all that shit you love. Here's Boba Fett. Here's Luke. Here's all this crazy shit, right? Like that you didn't know was coming, right? And you could have done that whole thing and never brought Luke into it, right?
Yeah.
But now it's like, here's Ahsoka. They literally dropped a nuclear bomb of franchise building in that second season, right? It's literally like the Genesis device in Star Trek, right? That sort of hits the planet and it grows the whole planet.
Mhm.
That's what fucking second season of Mandalorian is. They just drop a bomb in the Star Wars universe, and it's a whole new terrain.
And it terraformed Star Wars, or that pocket of Star Wars. There were a number of themes that appeared in these Reddit rumors. One of the big themes was the JJ v. Ryan v. Trevorrow comeback JJ. when you look at that whole saga in and of itself, FJ, what do you make of it in terms of JJ getting involved? And then it goes to Rian Johnson, and Trevorrow's out there doing 9, Ryan's filming 8, JJ's out promoting 7. What do you make of the dynamics there and how that sort of just played out? Because it, again, we said, the making of books seem to be on pause because
you're never going to get them.
We're never going to. You're right. We're never going to get them. What do you make of that? Because this Redditor seems to say, well, JJ had his own ideas. Rian Johnson was a company guy. He did whatever Disney said, and it seems crazy because Disney was indecisive. And then they begged JJ to come back to try to make sense of it all. What is your sense of how that played out?
I'll tell you my thoughts on it, and what I know is with the first movie, right, which I stand by 100%. I love it. Not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I love it because it's a really, really good TV pilot for the next generation of Star Wars. Like, it's literally like, here are these new characters, here they fit in with the old characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it's fascinating. You talk about the making of books, but when you look at the art of book for that movie, I talk about this a lot, which is chronological, and it starts when George is still involved, and Michael Arndt's involved. It's amazing how, as it keeps going into JJ, it becomes a New Hope ripoff visually, right? Like Jakku is this. Jakku, like there are drawings of Jakku of like city skyscrapers made out of spaceships and things like that. Like, and I think, and again, this is me putting more the producer hat on, is I can sit there and understand that Disney is sitting there going, we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in this. We got to make it familiar. We got to make it, warm and inviting, and a reaction to the prequels, right? To the reaction to the prequels. Like a reaction to the reaction,
right?
To the prequels, right? And then I think as they sort of chiseled away at that movie. By the way, I think if you go back and watch the movie, and Jimmy, you were talking about this, the reaction, the idea, everybody's always trying to get the Luke, I'm your father moment.
Yeah.
And that movie was originally designed to be the, oh my God, Han is Kylo's father moment. The original idea, I think, was he takes off the helmet, and he says, the face of my son, like, that's your holy shit moment, right? I think, and because if you go back and watch, there are 2 key moments, right? When Snoke says, the droid's in the hands of your father, Han Solo, right?
Yep.
And then the second scene where Han says to Leia, I saw him, I saw our son. It's all ADR. You actually never see Harrison Ford say that.
Right.
Right? And I'm convinced they changed it because they realized it wasn't going to work in some way in whatever the narrative was. Right? And I think they were building to that moment. Like, I think the idea was going to be mystery of, like, when you have Lor San Tekka in the beginning going, like, like, this is your grandfather, like, I'll show you what I've become.
Yeah, you can't escape the destiny of your family.
I think that was and I think the original thing was, like, it's in the hands of Han Solo, and he goes, that means nothing to me. Like, you could still keep it vague. But then watch, anytime Han and Leia talk about the son, anytime they mention the son, it's mostly ADR until they have the scene at the Rebel base where she goes, you're his father, and all that stuff. That's a reshoot. That was a pickup. That was a reshoot. I know that for a fact. So I think they were struggling with the idea of who's Rey, who's Kylo, right? How do they fit into all this? Because, there was always, they were twins, they were this, they were that. And somewhere along the way, it becomes a romanticized thing. Because I remember being told, like, it's you know, the other big telling thing, I'm sure I've mentioned. Sorry to anybody who's watching this and say the same.
We
shit
do get new listeners, so it's okay. They,
that's
they
good.
haven't heard. You know.
There's an interview JJ does with GQ, I think, a video thing where he takes questions from famous people.
Yes.
And Lucas is in it, and Lucas, his question is, "What happened to the grandkids of Darth Vader?" And I'm convinced that's his fuck you to JJ, right? Like that his original idea was like, these were the grandkids.
Yes.
You know, like I think one was Luke's kid and one was Han and Leia's kid, and the idea was they were the Force dyad or whatever the fuck it is, and it's a battle within the family, and that's the Skywalker saga. And right then and there, that's an infinitely better idea. But but the thing is, what they don't play up enough, what was always great about Rey is I never had a problem with her being somebody or nobody. Right? The problem is they couldn't decide on it.
Right.
Especially in the first two movies, right?
It's obvious.
So the first, and they cut, you know, and again, is in the novelization, something we probably talked about 10 years ago, is in the novelization, Kylo knows who she is. That's the scene where he goes, "What girl?" Right? He knows who the fuck she is.
Yes,
right?
he does.
And
even the way
so
he plays it.
So in the novelization of Force Awakens, when she gets the lightsaber, you know, at the end, you know, when she calls to it, all that shit, he goes, "It is you." And she's like, "What the fuck does that mean?" Right? Like, he knows who she is. And that's infinitely more interesting. And there's a bunch of shit that sort of gets lost along the way, but I don't think it's necessarily to the detriment of that first film. And it always goes shit on the second film, because the second film doesn't pick up on any of those threads. Right? So, like, he's not a Vader obsessive fanboy anymore. He's not this. He's into her. She's whatever. You know, the idea of Luke rejecting her is really interesting. You know what I mean? Like, there's all these interesting things, but there just doesn't seem to be this cohesive nature to the storytelling in a way where they're sitting there going, okay, we know how this is going to resolve, right? So you're sitting there going, you know, especially when you get to the Trevorrow script, the Duel of the Fates script, right? You're reading the Duel of the Fates script going, hey, this opening on a space station, whatever the hell it is actually pretty cool. Yeah. And there's some cool shit going on in Coruscant. But it's like, this is the opening to what the second movie should be.
Yes.
Not the third movie. So the problem is, and you can see what Trevorrow ran into is the same thing JJ runs into in the third movie, is you have to sort of make up for the fact that the second movie is basically just a 2.5 hour post-credit scene to the first movie. Right? That's all Last Jedi really is. It's a post-credit, it's a giant post-credit movie. Right? And so you've got to sort of make up where these characters have been when you get to the beginning of the third movie. And then you do this thing where it's like, you can sit there and they go very much like what JJ was trying to do in the first movie is, we're going to have Kylo go off and train with basically evil Yoda, right? Like, we're going to do this, you know, like, and so he's ripping off things from Empire Strikes Back, which actually probably would have worked in the second movie. So when you really think about the second movie, all Kylo is just sitting around force timing with Rey, like a fucking millennial, and then does one thing and blows his mom's ship up, right? That's sort of like really all he does until third act, and he kills Snoke, right? Yep. Which is a great bit, and you know the problem is the throne room scene, the lightsaber scene when he kills Snoke and all that is, in my opinion, like a franchise highlight. Like, like, shit on the movie all you want, but that fight scene is a franchise where you got me to cheer for the guy who killed Han Solo, right? Like if you can do that, like, you did something right.
I do agree with that. Yes,
it's a franchise highlight. It's extremely well. Like, the second movie looks better than the first one and the third one. Like, the JJ stuff, to me, like, the camera angles are too tight. It doesn't have scope to it, and all this shit, right? And where there's the second movie, it like breathes visually, like it's shot beautifully. It just doesn't fucking do anything until that throne room scene, right? And it's like, you know, it goes too far, but it you know, you talk about the rumors and stuff. I know we keep diverting from why we're here, But the problem becomes how to sit there and say, how do we connect these tissues? And that's the problem with the Trevorrow script. So you watch the Trevorrow script made me appreciate Rise of Skywalker more because it literally had the same problem structurally. We have to conclude this trilogy. Okay, that's the first thing. We have to connect the tissue from the last movie, but then we also have to connect the tissue of the first movie that the second movie ignored. Right.
And find a way to make it fit into the bigger saga on a whole. All 9 films.
Yeah. And by the way, you Reddit asshole, there was never a conversation about 2 movies or whatever. There was never.
No?
They didn't have enough time to do that. No. Never, ever. They
People
would
do
never,
talk about
ever
that.
sit there and... what are they going to do? 9.1, 9.2?
They talk
They'll
about a
never fucking
JJ
do that.
cut also.
There's no
Does that
JJ
exist? No JJ cut. Okay.
I'm sure. Look, there's probably an assembly edit that has very different things that have changed, but there's not like a different movie somewhere.
Right.
What about you brought up Finn earlier and what kind of a tragedy that character was, and there was the idea of creating a romance between him and according to this Redditor, Rey, and then and Disney said no. They were concerned of backlash. And
I've never heard that.
And then
Never
he pitched a relationship between Finn and Poe, and that was a big no. So
They would never
what do
do
you
that.
think the original vision was for Finn? Why was this character created? And what was he supposed to do?
I mean, when you really think about it, he has such a rich setup. It's like,
yeah.
And this is what I love about those characters is that they sat there and they went, well, what, we always had this iteration, we never had a stormtrooper point of view. We never had, etc. And I think that's really fascinating. And I think, to be honest, I don't think they knew, right? Like I don't think JJ sat there and was like, okay, these two are going to end up together. These two are going to hook up. These two are going to blah, blah, blah. Like that's the Poe Rey thing in the Trevorrow script is creepy. It doesn't fucking work at all. And it just feels like, oh wait, we need a romance.
Well, there's remnants of it, even in the cut that we see. There's sort of that they're trying at the very beginning, when Finn and Poe get back from that mission, and
I don't think that's romance.
What kind of a mood is she in, or what kind of mood is he in, and all this. You don't think that's remnants of the relationship?
No. I'll tell you 2 things. I think that is more. Let's show some development between these characters because again. The thing I remember literally like, oh my fucking God, right? When I watched the second movie is at the end where he's like, I'm Poe and I'm Rey. And I'm like, oh my God, we got through 2 movies and we didn't have like the gang. Like we didn't have the gang. The beauty of the second, the beauty of the first movie was, it had a sense of adventure and a team spirit. Like it was going to end but then when you get to the second movie, none of them are together, right?
Right.
And all this shit, right? So even when you got to Empire Strikes Back, the first, 20 minutes, half hour, when they're on Hoth, it's Han and Luke are doing their thing, and everybody's got their little moment together. Like, when Luke's laid out and she kisses him, all that shit, right? There's still, I think that's what it's trying to replicate, Jason. Like, I think that's what.
Gotcha.
So they're trying to show, hey, the team's, now it's a couple years later, they're a team, there are personalities, there are dynamics to this crew. So I don't think it's a romantic thing. If anything, the sort of lost thing is in the end of the second movie is she looks at Finn taking care of Rose. Right? She's sort of sitting there. She looks over before I think then Leia sits down with her or whatever, all that shit, right? And I think that was at least a triangle of some kind because I don't think JJ ever had the intention of Kylo and Rey as a romantic thing. I think that's a Kathy Kennedy thing. I really do. From what I'm told, she was like, it's got to end with the 2 of them, and he's got to die. Because that was the other big thing.
Romeo and Juliet style. I mean, that kind of idea. Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is, both Ryan and Trevorrow both felt Kylo was irredeemable just for the fact that he killed Han. And I sort of get that. I sort of the one thing that sort of does surprisingly work in Rise of Skywalker that shouldn't work but does is Kylo going back to being Ben Solo. Like that actually works, and it's actually really interesting. You're sort of sitting there going, "Oh, that would have been cool if you did that in the second movie." You know what I mean? Like if you really did turn.
Well, you wanted to see more of it. I wanted to see more of Ben Solo after those moments. Yeah.
And he's sort of really good in those brief moments. And again, it's that retroactive thing of like, oh, a lot of these things could have happened in the second movie. You know what I mean? Like it teed up in the second movie. Because all really the second movie tees up is it teases some sort of connection with them, the romance and all this shit. And then they have the moment, Snoke's dead and all that shit. And he's like, destroy the past. And I'm cool with that if that's a choice that stays throughout the whole thing, right? Because Rey, you know, the other big, I watched them again recently, the sort of three of them, and it's bizarre how she's like a different actor in the second movie.
Yeah,
like she's really flat, sort of lifeless to it, and sort of a moron. In it, like every choice she make, you know, everybody talks about Mary Sue and blah blah blah, everything she does is great. Second movie, everything she does is a fuck up, right? Like, and she sort of doesn't learn anything from it. And at least in the third movie, JJ gets the character back on track and gives her agency and gives her, you know, all that stuff, because that's when you know it's good. That first movie, because never once, at least in my mind or people I know, ever questioned those three new characters as being part of the Star Wars universe.
Yep.
And that's a testament to what JJ did. Like, you don't sit there and go like, yeah, like Jar Jar Binks, like, fuck him. You know what I mean? Like, I don't accept him. I don't give a shit about him. Right? Finn, Rey, Poe, people accept from the start. And the problem is the second movie does nothing to advance them. And then the third movie has to sit there and go back to what Jason was saying about the scene where they're bickering and all that shit. Like, that's the shit that you start the second movie with. Like, hey, they've been on adventures. Ord Mantell. You know what I mean? Like, references like that sort of sit there and go, we went on this thing. And but the problem, you know, the problem is, and this is JJ being a fucking TV director, is he ends that first one on a cliffhanger, which almost paints you into a corner, right? Yes. What I would have done with the second movie is I would have started, it's 6 months later, no one's heard from Rey, and she's been there for 6 months and Luke hasn't spoken to her yet. That's the trademark of every, like, Shaolin Temple movie where, like, a young person wants to be trained. Like, they kneel outside the temple for 6 months and it rains and it snows and it's like you show dedication, all that shit. And, you know, and I don't, you know, the problem is there are choices made in the third movie. You know, Luke, I didn't train you because you were a Palpatine, right? Sorry, dude. You know, like, I think he would have double trained her. I can prevent this. I can prevent the Antichrist. You know what I mean? Like, literally. Like, I could prevent, you know, like, there's something, but I guarantee you, they didn't sit there and think when they were doing those first two movies, like, yeah, this is Palpatine.
No.
Right?
There's no foreshadowing. I mean, there's no
when they created Snoke, let me tell you how Snoke was created. Snoke was created, it was like, you know, somebody sat there and was like, we need an Emperor character. We need an Emperor kind of character, right? Oh, he looks cool. Let's do that. Right, and that's it. That's what the fuck. And somebody can worry about it later.
Somebody can worry about it later. I wanted to ask you about that because that was also a big chunk of these rumors was, you know, Matt Smith, who disappeared from the production, and Palpatine, the Palpatine that we got, the Ian McDiarmid version versus maybe a younger clone, Matt Smith. What do you make of those rumors? And do you have any idea how late into production perhaps it was before the Ian McDiarmid version of Palpatine became a figure?
I tried to look into this in advance. Sorry, the dog's making a cameo.
Oh, it's all right. Oh, look at that. Love. You got FJ's a little pug
She's
here.
a blind old lady. She's a blind old lady. I tried to look into this, the Matt Smith thing, because I had heard, I knew Palpatine was coming back, but from what I had been told, it was Ian McDiarmid from the beginning. So I don't know. I have a feeling, I don't think they shot anything with Matt Smith. I just have a feeling they didn't shoot. This is not based on anything, because no one ever told me, yeah, Matt Smith was here and we shot with Matt Smith. And I think there might have been an idea, which I really like, of the idea of like, we've cloned this guy, and it's the young. Why wouldn't you clone him as a young dude in his prime, right?
Yeah.
You know, and there's something interesting. I don't know if this is a Bad Batch thing, because we haven't on the show really talked about Bad Batch, which I'm enjoying much more than I thought I would. And I think some of this is going to play into, and I think Mandalorian's going to pick. I think Mandalorian is going to retroactively make the sequel trilogy look better by the time it's over. But I'll get to that. I don't think they shot anything with Matt Smith. I think the idea was a young Palpatine clone, and somebody at some point thought, well, it's going to be confusing. Let's just go for the classic version, which doesn't work entirely. Like, how much more interesting would it have been if like a young Palpatine showed up and he's got a lightsaber and he's got and he can fight the two of them, you know, as opposed to the dude fucking hooked up and shit like that.
Right.
You know,
like Dark Empire.
Yeah, like, I mean, the thing is, you get into like, what is force transference? What is, you know, like there's some interesting questions which Bad Batch has sort of triggered. Of, hey, if you clone somebody, is it like a carbon copy of a Xerox of a fax, right? So like, are your powers diminished? Do the midi-chlorians carry over? Like, there's fascinating shit with that, right? So there would have been a really interesting thing of, you know, we cloned young Palpatine. He can only let's just say he's got 30% of his force powers, so he needs to drain that shit out of you two, right? Like force dyad is that's really interesting and fun and clear. You know, and that's the other thing. It's like super clear in terms of its explanation. The problem is, I'm convinced if JJ had an extra year to do Rise of Skywalker, it's so fucking rushed. It's so rushed. I think if he had another year, he would have made a better movie with the same movie, but it would have been much better, and would have had these explanations. Because I mean, literally, you walk into that movie and like in the first 5 minutes, here's Palpatine, right? And Palpatine's alive, and it's like, wait, what? Like, no one's questioning this. What is, you know? Then you have the dwarf from fucking Lord of the Rings, like, oh well, it could be, you know. And it's like you don't have time to get into all this shit, right? And the fact that they sort of bullshit their way that's Mustafar, which it's not in the beginning, and Vader's castle and all that shit bullshit. That was not. That was a different planet when they conceived it, because they had, and you've seen it, I think, in some of the making of back still. Hux was there, and Richard E. Grant was there, and all that shit. That was a completely different planet. There's no way. You know, they had the fucking big creature, which they made and they shot and didn't use. And I think they just wanted to like get this over with. Get the fucking Wayfarer, whatever I don't know.
The
why
Wayfinder.
Yeah, why not call it a holocron? It's such a cooler fucking name, right? But I don't think, to the point of the Reddit dude, I'm sure a lot of these things were ideas they wanted to do that they just couldn't do, or didn't have time to do, or the money to do. Like, you know, like somebody told me, like at the end, like you're gonna have all these Force ghosts come back and all that shit. And I just think they didn't have the time to sit there and go, we're gonna film Hayden, we're gonna film Liam Neeson, we're gonna film Ahsoka, we're gonna film all this shit, right? And all that, instead she just stares into space, she hears some voices, and all of a sudden she can melt the sky, right? And it just to me as a filmmaker, it reeks of, we're out of time and money, and these are the ideas. You know, like I just don't know how they don't sit there and be like, let's just give it another year and make it great. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't think that's JJ's fault. I think I'm sympathetic towards JJ with that. And
it was under corporate pressure from Bob Iger and the gang at Disney. They were very firm on those release dates.
And I think they learned the lesson from it. I think they learned the lesson from that and Solo in particular. I think, you know, Iger, I give him a lot of credit, sat there and went, you know, the release date was my idea. And the release date, you know, again, they should have just at a certain point said, let's push everything a year. Push Solo a year, push Rise of Skywalker a year. And they probably would have been making an Obi-Wan movie by now, as opposed to the show. Yes. So I think we're going to benefit from the show. I think the biggest loser in all this was the Solo movie, and I think they're going to do more in that world, just not with the Solo kid.
Well, FJ, before we wrap this up, I mean, this has been a great sort of trip down.
Yeah, we didn't even really get to the Reddit shit. I'm sorry.
Well, we kind of did. I feel like we did, but. You brought up Bad Batch. You brought up Kenobi, and you actually made a claim just a few minutes ago that perhaps Mandalorian, along with Bad Batch, are going to retroactively change our perception of the sequel trilogy. So, what are we could play a little prophet or loser. What are your what are your thoughts about? Let's just take them one at a time. Bad Batch. How is it going to potentially make a significant contribution to the Star Wars mythos? What are your predictions for Bad Batch and how it's going to shape up?
The Omega kid. Mm-hmm. The kid is something. The kid is, and I think if you connect it to the Mandalorian and Rise of Skywalker, she could be some sort of early Palpatine clone.
Oh, okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. Like, 'cause she doesn't look like them. They don't look like that as kids, right?
Right.
We know
like
that.
she doesn't have black hair. She has blonde, wavy Palpatine kind of hair. That could be a stretch. What I think she is potentially some sort of clone that in some way ties into the attempts of cloning we see in Mandalorian. Because everybody forgets that bit in Mandalorian where they see the Snoke clone. Like, what the fuck is that all about? Right? Yeah. Like, they sort of tee that up, and it doesn't, they're thinking it. Like, they know it. Like, Filoni and Favreau, they're too fucking smart. Like, everything means something. There's no bullshit. There's no fat on those shows, right? So I think because everything now on the TV thing is the Filoni verse, right?
Yep.
That somehow the Bad Batch will not necessarily directly connect, but loosely connect to whatever the Empire's trying to do with cloning, and subsequently how Palpatine comes back, right? In some way, shape, or like what happens if you clone somebody with the Force? Remember all those rumors when we were kids, like Obi-Wan's coming back as a clone, Obi-Wan's a clone, and all this shit, right?
Obi-Wan,
like, all this crazy shit, right? Like, but the thing is, I just think that's how they tangentially. Does I say the word right? How they all connect in some way, shape, or form, right? Like Tarkin's there for a reason, right? Like I can easily imagine Tarkin sitting there and setting the stage for things that we see in the Mandalorian, right? Like that Giancarlo Esposito's character. What's the guy with the darksaber?
Moff Gideon.
Moff Gideon. I'm telling you, like, I think that Gideon is doing stuff that's setting up in Bad Batch. And I'm really impressed with Bad Batch because I didn't like those characters in the Clone Wars episodes. And I feel like they sat there and they went, okay, they're really corny in the Clone Wars episodes. How do we even those personalities out and make them mean something? And they've done a really good job with it. And I thought, they're going to put a fucking kid in this and it's going to suck. They're going to put a kid, right? And it's like, this is actually really good. Like, this is really interesting. And the first episode in particular does a really good job of saying, here's where this sits within the franchise, right? You sort of know these guys are going to pop up in Clone Wars. Like, you sort of know their history and all this shit. But, like, here's where they sit in the world, and we can go from there. And I actually think it does more. This will do more to humanize the clones. Like the second episode where they're with Cut and the family and all that shit. Like I just thought all that was really good and really strong. But the kid is the surprise of it because it's just like, it's another fucking annoying kid. But it's like, no, she actually, she does a good job of humanizing them.
Yes.
But also driving the thing and how she ties into the Kaminoans. All that stuff is really fascinating. Like, I love that they're going back to Lama Su. All this shit, like, what is going on with that? Tarkin, that new general who's with him, the younger guy. All this. But, again, I think that, if I can do one prophet or loser thing, I think Omega, whatever the character is, because she's got the accent, ties into whatever the Moff Gideon program could be. Right? Like whatever we learn by the time this is over. I don't know how much they're doing a Bad Batch, but I think it ties into that and then maybe ties into the cloning stuff that brings back Palpatine. I actually think, by the way, the one thing out of Rise of Skywalker that nobody's really touched is the what's the planet? The Sith planet? Exegol.
Exegol.
Right. I think who the fuck are all those people, right? Like there's a whole fascinating world.
That's a great example of you got to read the damn visual guide to even know who the hell all those people are.
I think there's a whole rich thing in the future of Sith cultists, all that shit, and how they like, and I think it was an extra 5 minutes of sitting there going like, there's a cleaner way to do all that in the movie. Like we've been trying for 30 years to clone Palpatine, but all we could do is reconstruct his old body, and we need him to have Force powers to bring darkness back to the galaxy. The biggest mistake they made with that was the production design of, because they're retroactively now figuring it out in the comics, is like, hey, he had a whole fleet of Star Destroyers. Like, there should have been a clear visual distinction between Final Order, First Order, all that shit, right? The Red Troopers and all that crap, right? That should have been an interesting thing of like, you know, Richard E. Grant's character is off. He was like the last general. He's the one, you know, Operation Cinder, whatever the fuck it is, right? You know, we've built this whole thing for 30 years, and we finally got Palpatine back, but we were waiting for, you know, the Force dyad to emerge, and now we can do this, right? It's super clean, right? It's super clean and easier to do that. And then, of course, you know, like, so you never had to make her the granddaughter of Palpatine. She could have been a clone. She could have been something else. Or you could have kept her as nobody. And I actually think her taking the name Skywalker is more meaningful with her being nobody than her being the granddaughter of Palpatine. But if they had thought about it first, right, because you know they didn't, is she would have been exhibiting evil force shit like the lightning and all that crap in the second movie, right? Like the second movie, she like, oh, I'm drawn to the cave and I'm looking at the reflection of the silhouettes. Like, what the hell does that mean? At least when Luke did that, fucking Vader came out, right? Like, fucking Vader came out. And we learned something, right? And all this shit. But anyway, to go back to the Prophet Loser thing, I think Boba Fett is going to be hilarious, probably. Like, and just, I think they're going to separate that out from the Mandalorian stuff. And I think Ahsoka, Mandalorian, the Rangers of the New Republic. I think they've already told us what everything is. So, Rangers of the New Republic is about that dude from Kim's Convenience, who we've met, you know, Filoni's partner, you know, in the X-Wing partner.
You know, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about that, because they did not include his name in the For Your Consideration awards pitch that they published. No, you don't think so?
No, because I think I'm talking the Rangers of the New Republic show is that motherfucker.
Yeah, but wouldn't they then include his name for Emmy consideration for season 2 of The Mandalorian? They included everyone else.
He's going to get his own fucking show, right? So I think they're going to change. I think they're going to change it now with Cara Dune, right? I think what that show is going to be. That show is the New Republic dudes uncovering the existence of the First Order, or the beginnings of the origins of the First Order. I think that's what that show is. Right? Because he says there, he goes, something's going on out here. He says that to Cara Dune. Something's going on out here. Something's up. He's going to uncover a bunch of shit, right? Mandalorian, you're going to go back to Grogu. What does Grogu mean?
Well, I was going to ask you. Let me just pause on that for a second. Mandalorian post Grogu. So you think Grogu's coming back? He's going to continue to be a character in this series? And how do we get him away from Luke? And is Luke going to be a bigger figure? What are your thoughts there?
I think my first inclination was like, you end the fucking show right here. Just end it. Like, don't do any more. Right?
Yeah. You peaked.
And then have, but you know, they haven't made that. You know, they're doing Boba Fett now.
Right.
They haven't started the next Mandalorian. So I think they're going to buy, when I talk about the 3-year gap and all that shit, they're going to create demand for those two characters, Grogu, and the mystery is going to be how you get them together. I have no idea. But there will be something that brings them together, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see Luke again because it was so well received. Like, I'm not necessarily saying he's going to be part of the gang and all that stuff.
Right.
But I think we're going to go to his school that Kylo eventually destroys. I wouldn't, and the thing is, you can, because it's Filoni in particular, in Favreau, you can think bigger. right? Like you can think the more fan. So like you can sit there and imagine a scenario where Grogu's with Ben Solo. I mean, I don't think he's born yet,
right?
But
right.
depending on how much time goes by and all that shit, right? Like, or like I'm gonna have a nephew, or I'm gonna do all this shit, right? Like,
sure.
But I think they haven't. My gut. Let me go back. My gut on Mandalorian season is something happens to Din Djarin, and it's actually Grogu's going to have to save him, because I think the bad guy in the bad guy in Mandalorian season 3 is Katie Sackhoff, and I think because they set that up, because she's basically like, hey, by the way, we're the real Mandalorians. You're part of a fucking cult, dude. And I think
And
the
she wants
next
that
season
Darksaber.
Mandalorian. I think it's Mandalorians, the Darksaber. It's all the Mandalorian bullshit. Like we might even go, to places we've been to in Clone Wars and all that shit. So I think that's what the third season is. I think third season is Mandalorians versus Mandalorians. What is it a Mandalorian? And Grogu deciding he's a Mandalorian, not a Jedi. That's my gut. Make a note of that. I might be right about that. Like, because they have the symbol and all that shit, and he's sworn, like, hey, that's my clan. That's my gang. I got to go help this guy. Right. So I think that carries that. Then I think Rangers of the New Republic picks up all the X-Wing pilot stuff of there's something going on out here. And there's something growing. There's something new. There's something happening. And that's the birth of the First Order. Right? And that could eventually, by the way, tie into some of the Moff Gideon stuff outside of the Darksaber, like the cloning thing that we see with Snoke and all that shit, right? There's a possibility with that. The third show, which is Ahsoka, is Ahsoka going after, trying to find Ezra.
Oh, really? You think that's...
Yeah, she's going after Ezra. Thrawn is going to be in it. I think that's her whole grudge, I think that's where Filoni gets his sequel.
His
That's
Rebel
where I think
sequel.
he gets it. Yeah, he gets his Rebel sequel of, hey, because what's the whole episode where she fights the woman and all that stuff? Where's your boss? Where's Thrawn? Where's all this shit? I mean, literally, they handed it to you. This is what I'm talking about before. The nuclear bomb of fucking Star Wars in that second season is we didn't even realize they were setting up all those different shows. I thought they were setting up things for other Mandalorian seasons. No, motherfucker, they were setting up shows. They were setting up years and years of shit. They basically, when I said before you can't replicate a Marvel thing, they did their version of what they could do.
Is that the Favreau element, FJ?
Yeah, because you can't touch Favreau like that. See, that's the thing is, I think what happened was that show, that first season, flew under the radar, where you had a filmmaker you could trust who sat there and understood. This is why Favreau does all these big movies. Right, does all the Disney movies, all this shit, right? He could do anything, right? And he sat there with Filoni and understood what Filoni offered, and gave him that opportunity to grow as a storyteller, right? That's why I think Bad Batch is going to connect, all that stuff, because Filoni isn't sitting there like, look how much the second season ties to the Filoni-verse before this, to Rebels, to Clone Wars, all this shit, right? So I think what they're doing now is their interconnected universe is building from this way. Fuck the features. You don't even need a feature right now.
Right.
Yeah. I think what you could do is, and I think I said this last time I was here, I think you could do something where all those shows, Ahsoka, Mandalorian, Rangers of the New Republic, after a couple of seasons each, all converge into a giant feature of some kind.
Well, that was my next question, is where do you see the features going? We know we've got Rogue Squadron. We don't know what's going on with that. We've got the
Taika.
Yep, the Taika Waititi. Are these placeholders for the Disney Plus series to converge like you're describing, or is
I think
it
those will be
completely
separate.
different?
I think those will be separate.
Yeah.
I don't know if they make those movies. The thing is,
that's right.
And when I say I don't think they're going to make, I'm not saying they won't. I'm saying I don't know if they make them in a post-COVID world. What is the audience for features and all that shit, right? Yeah. Like I don't know. Like a Taika Star Wars movie makes perfect sense, but the problem is, he goes and he's going to be on Thor for the next year and a half. Do you get that window with him? Maybe you do. And it's great. And he goes and does something fresh and new and comedic with Star Wars, and it's really interesting and fun. The Patty Jenkins thing, I have no idea. I mean,
do we even know, Jim? I was going to ask you, do we even know what era that is? We don't know anything.
What, the Patty Jenkins thing?
Yeah, the Rogue Squadron.
I think it's sequel era stuff, or something that might fill in the gap between the two trilogies. I don't think it's anything post sequels, but I think it's closer connected to the sequels.
Okay, so we're not getting it. It's not like it's not Luke and Wedge and these guys.
No. I'm sure it's going to be
all I'm going to say
new
is
roster.
Without spoiling. At one point, you did say what it is. That's all I'm going to say.
No,
you literally of the 5 things you just laid out. One of them is right, from what I've been told.
Oh man, we could talk to you all night, dude. We want to be respectful of your time. I like I said, I love your perspective on this stuff because
thank you.
You know enough as someone with the experience and being a veteran of the industry, yet at the same time, you're still so much a fan, and you have that perspective as well. So it's really fun to hear those two worlds sort of converge. And we're always here anytime. Keep those emails going anytime you want to come on. And
I sound like a cranky old man, but I love it. I love you guys. I love the people who listen to this, and it's always an honor to come back home to chat with you guys and let me ramble on and on and on. And you know, it's just those Reddit things really triggered me. So everybody knows that's what triggered this conversation. Is, you know, what's out there isn't always true, and you know, in this day and age, people can take advantage of it, and you know, it's, you know, it could all be worse. I mean, that's the thing. Everybody gets worked up over this shit. It's the beauty. You know, I'll sort of end with this. Is we're in a time where we're getting all this stuff, and if you don't like something, don't worry. There's other stuff coming that you may like or don't like. My logic is always this: just make it good.
Yeah.
If it's not good, you know, like I hate a lot of the Snyder I hate Justice League, all that. So DC Comics, as you guys know, is my other great love, especially Batman. Mm-hmm. So there's another Batman movie coming now. Michael Keaton's coming back. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like, okay, we've got Mandalorian. I love Mandalorian, right? Okay, so now we're gonna get Boba Fett, right? And not everything, you know, I'm going through that with Marvel now. Like the Marvel shows, the WandaVision and Falcon, they're heavily flawed shows. They're not great shows, nowhere near as good as Mandalorian. But, you know, I'm invested in that world. So I want to see what happens. They're not great shows. Guess what? Loki's coming in a month. Something else to talk to my friends about. You know what I mean? Like, we're in a golden age of this shit. You know what I mean? Like, people don't remember. There are two things people don't remember because, A, I'm old enough to remember a world without Star Wars, right? Before it began. But then there's that whole gap where between 83 and 97 or whatever that there were no movies and you thought that's fucking it, right? So there's always going to be stuff. If you don't like it, there's always new stuff. You know, I sort of trained myself with the prequels with this. Is, you know, especially the first one. It's not a great movie, but I know how to find those moments that I love and those things and understand. Like, I got to learn more about this world that I'm obsessed with. Yeah, and that's gonna. I mean, look, you know, I don't want to go on a whole Star Trek tangent, but I can't stand fucking Picard and all this stuff. And I'm a diehard Trekkie.
Yeah,
but
you and me both.
The next one. All right, we'll see what happens. But no, I appreciate. Look, as always, I appreciate you guys letting me ramble. Anybody listening, thank you. I have to do this because usually Kyle is on it, then he does all the talking. So I got to do all this shit. So,
all right, man. Well, always a pleasure. And FJ, if there's folks out there that want to hear more from you, you are on social media, I believe.
I got booted off Twitter, so I'm not on Twitter. So Instagram at FJ DeSanto.
All right.
And that's where I just post all the work stuff and. You know, I'm on Facebook and stuff like that. I always get, every time I do one of these, I get a million Facebook requests. And stuff.
And then,
cool.
The Transformers Season 3 Netflix coming up this summer? July.
Yeah, end of July, I think.
Okay, cool.
I don't know the exact date, but it's done. Like, meaning, it's done. So,
and is your time with Transformers over now, or
you never say never?
Yeah.
But for this iteration of Transformers, I'm out. But I have another show which I'll tease. I haven't really done this yet. There's another animated thing I'm doing for Netflix based on a popular video game, which hasn't been announced yet. That is going to come out in 2022, which is occupying a bit of my time now. It's another one I'm producing in Japan.
Cool.
A big fighting game. That's all I'm going to say. And I'll leave it at that.
Tantalizing. Well, please come back and tell us about it when you are able to. And
of course.
And then we've got lots to look forward to. So maybe we'll get you on after we see what happens with Bad Batch, and we can chat more about that.
How many episodes is Bad Batch?
16.
Oh shit, we got plenty of time. Okay.
We got all summer, baby. FJ, brother, so happy to have you on the show with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, you certainly had a lot to say. You brought up Kyle. For the longest time, we would have you and Kyle on together. And I was thinking to myself, boy, FJ is just a kind of a soft-spoken guy, man of few words. Well, I think we all realized what it was Kyle. It was you couldn't get a word in edgewise.
I saw Kyle.
It's really refreshing.
One of my first post-COVID experiences with other human beings. I saw Kyle last week. We had a nice vaccinated hug and a kiss, and caught up a little bit. So
he, of course, is hard at work on his latest movie. They're in post-production.
I may have seen it. That's where I might have been. I might have been seeing it.
Wow, awesome,
very cool, very cool.
All right, well, we love you. We love Kyle, and all the best. And we will talk to you again very soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
Thanks, FJ.
Bye.
Bye.
Chewie, get us out of here!
Hey, this is Dave Filoni of Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you are listening to Rebel Force Radio.